I'm Gloria, 30, female. I live in a quiet suburban town that looks like it was pulled from a movie set. For the last 5 years, I've shared a beautiful colonial-style house with my husband, Mark. As a professional archivist for the city's historical society, my life revolves around order, documentation, and preserving the truth of the past, a skill that I never imagined I would have to turn on my own life. This is the story of how my husband told me to pack my things and leave, not realizing that my things included every single item that made our house a home. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Our life, on the surface, was perfect. Mark was a successful financial analyst, handsome and charismatic. I was the quieter, more stable half of our pair, the one who remembered birthdays, paid the bills on time, and knew exactly where to find the warranty for the dishwasher we bought 3 years ago. Our friends saw us as the ideal couple, he, the charming go-getter, and I, the thoughtful, steady presence that grounded him. Our home was a reflection of this image. It was beautifully furnished, with a mix of modern pieces and vintage finds that I had lovingly curated over the years. Every painting, every rug, every piece of silverware had a story, and I was the keeper of those stories. Mark loved to show it off. He'd host dinners for his colleagues, beaming as they complimented the decor or the expensive espresso machine. Gloria has an amazing eye, he'd say, placing a possessive hand on my shoulder. She turns this house into a home. At the time, I took it as a compliment. I saw it as a partnership. He made the money, or at least that's what everyone thought, and I made the life. It was a traditional arrangement that seemed to work. He was the flashy cover of the book, and I was the carefully catalogued pages within. My job as an archivist isn't just a profession, it's a part of who I am. I document everything. I keep meticulous records. When my grandmother passed away a few years before I married Mark, she left me a substantial inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to change my life. She had always told me, Gloria, never depend on anyone but yourself. Keep your own name, your own bank account, and your own records. I took her advice to heart. The down payment for our house came from my inheritance. The furniture, the appliances, the renovations, all of it was paid for from my private account, the one Mark knew about but never had access to. I wasn't trying to be secretive, I was just being prudent. I was being an archivist of my own assets. I had a detailed spreadsheet with scanned receipts for every single purchase, from the $10.00 leather sofa to the $15 set of salt and pepper shakers. Mark saw the beautiful home, but I saw a collection of assets, each one carefully documented and belonging solely to me. He never questioned it. He was too busy enjoying the lifestyle my inheritance afforded us to worry about the details. He just assumed my good taste was being funded by his salary, a salary I knew was mostly spent on expensive lunches, flashy suits, and weekends with his boys. The lie wasn't just his, in a way, it was ours. We were living in a museum of my creation, and he was acting like its king, completely unaware he was just a guest. The first crack appeared not as a loud shatter, but as a series of subtle, almost imperceptible shifts. It started with Mark's phone. It used to lie face up on the kitchen counter, buzzing with notifications from work or sports apps. Suddenly, it was always face, down or tucked away in his pocket. When I'd ask who texted, he'd give a vague answer. Just work, he'd murmur, his eyes not leaving the screen. He started working late more often, citing a big project that required his full attention. As a financial analyst, long hours weren't unusual, so at first, I didn't think much of it. I'd make him a plate of food, cover it, and leave it in the microwave for when he got home, often long after I'd gone to sleep. Then came the changes in his behavior towards me. The easy affection we once shared began to feel rehearsed. His compliments, which used to be specific and genuine, became generic. "You look nice, honey," he'd say without looking up from his laptop. Our conversations thinned out, replaced by a comfortable but hollow silence. I tried to bridge the gap. I suggested date nights, weekend trips, anything to reconnect. He always had an excuse. "I'm swamped at work, Gloria. I'm just too tired. Maybe next month." I felt a growing sense of unease, a quiet dread that settled in my stomach. It was like finding a small tear in an ancient document. At first, it seems insignificant, but you know that if you don't address it, it will eventually destroy the entire page. My best friend, Sarah, noticed it too. We were having coffee one Saturday afternoon while Mark was supposedly at an emergency work seminar. He seems distant. Sarah said, stirring her latte and watching me with the concerned eyes of a friend who knew me better than I knew myself. "Is everything okay with you too?" I gave her the same excuses Mark gave me. "He's just stressed with work. It's a big project." But even as I said the words, they tasted like lies. Sarah, a high school teacher used to seeing through excuses, didn't push, but her silence was more telling than any question. The foundation of our marriage, which I believed was built on solid ground, was starting to feel like it was resting on sand. The signs were all there, like footnotes in a historical text that hinted at a darker story beneath the official narrative. There were unexplained credit card charges for dinners for two at restaurants we'd never been to together. There was the new expensive cologne he started wearing, a scent I had never smelled before, and there was the way he'd sometimes look at me. Not with love, but with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt. Annoyance, pity. It was a look that made me feel like I was a piece of history he was ready to file away and forget. The discovery wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't me finding a text message or a lipstick stain. It was quieter, colder, and in a way, much more fitting for a woman who deals in facts and paper trails. It happened on a Tuesday. Mark had left early for work, and I was doing our laundry. As I emptied the pockets of his suit trousers, a crumpled piece of paper fell out. It was a receipt. My archivist instincts kicked in before my wifely ones did. I smoothed it out, my eyes scanning the details automatically. It was from a high-end jewelry store in the city, a place we'd shopped at but never entered. The date was from the previous week. The item purchased was a delicate gold necklace with a small, single diamond. The price made my breath catch in my throat. It was expensive. Far too expensive for a casual gift. My first thought was, it's for me. Our anniversary was in 2 months. Maybe he was planning a surprise. A wave of relief washed over me, and I felt a pang of guilt for my recent suspicions. I smiled, folding the receipt carefully and tucking it into my wallet. I decided not to mention it to let him have his surprise, but the relief was short-lived. The nagging feeling in my gut, the one I had been suppressing for months, wouldn't go away. The details didn't add up. Mark was a terrible gift giver. He always asked me for a list, and his idea of a surprise was buying the brand I pointed out last week. This, a spontaneous, thoughtful, and expensive purchase, was completely out of character. That evening, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Mark came home late, smelling of that new cologne. He gave me a quick peck on the cheek and collapsed on the sofa, the beautiful gray leather sofa that I had paid for. I watched him, my heart pounding. I tried to act normal. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. "Long." He grunted, already scrolling through his phone. The image of the receipt burned in my mind. Later that night, after he had fallen asleep, I did something I had never done before. I took his phone from the nightstand. My hands were shaking. I didn't know his password, but I tried the one thing he loved more than me, his car. The model and year, it unlocked. My stomach churned as I opened his messages. I didn't have to scroll far. There was a conversation with a name I didn't recognize, Jessica. The messages were filled with heart emojis and pet names. And then I saw it, a picture she had sent him that afternoon. It was a selfie of a young woman, pretty and smiling, wearing the delicate gold necklace from the receipt. The caption read, "I love it so much. Best surprise ever, baby." Time stopped. The air in the room felt thick and heavy. Every breath was a struggle. I scrolled through months of messages, my vision blurring with tears. It was all there. The late nights at work, the seminars, the expensive dinners. It was a meticulously documented affair. I felt a cold, chilling clarity wash over me. The crack in the foundation wasn't a crack. It was a gaping chasm, and I had just fallen into it. I put the phone back on the nightstand, my movements precise and silent. I went downstairs and sat on my sofa in my house and looked at the life I had built, and I realized the truth. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed me in my own home, paid for with my own money. The receipt in my wall, it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a receipt for a broken heart, and the final, irrefutable piece of evidence in the archive of my dead marriage. The days following my discovery were a blur of quiet, controlled grief. I went to work. I sorted through historical documents. I catalogued artifacts from a bygone era. And with every file I organized, every record I preserved, my own resolve hardened. The archivist in me took over, silencing the heartbroken wife. Emotion was a liability, data was power. My personal life became my new project, and I approached it with the same methodical precision I used for my job. The goal was no longer to save my marriage, but to document its demise and prepare for the aftermath. My first step was to create a new secure file on my personal laptop, password. Protected and backed up to an encrypted hard drive, I titled it Project Uncoupling. The first documents I uploaded were a photo of the jewelry receipt and the damning pictures from Mark's phone, which I had discreetly forwarded to a private email address I created that night. Then I began to follow the paper trail of our entire life together. I went back through 5 years of bank statements, credit card bills, and household accounts. I didn't need to hack into anything. Mark had always left the boring money stuff to me. It was all there, neatly filed away in my home office. I started with the house itself. I scanned the deed, which was in both our names, but then I pulled up the bank trance for records showing the down payment coming directly from my inheritance account. I scanned the receipts for the new roof, the kitchen remodel, the bathroom renovation, all paid for by me. Next, I moved to the contents of the house. This was where my meticulous nature truly shone. For years, I had maintained a digital inventory of our significant possessions for insurance purposes. It was a detailed spreadsheet with photos, purchase dates, serial numbers, and scanned copies of every receipt. The leather sofa, the solid oak dining table, the 70-inch television, the state of the art sound system, the Persian rugs, the original artwork on the walls, the high-end kitchen appliances. The bed we slept in, every single item of value had been purchased by me from my account. I cross-referenced every item with its corresponding receipt, highlighting the payment method. The paper trail was undeniable. Mark's financial contributions to our household were limited to some of the groceries and his own car payments. He had been living a life almost entirely funded by me, all while making me feel like I was the one who was lucky to have him. I contacted my friend Sarah, not for emotional support this time, but for a witness. I needed someone to know what I was doing, just in case things got ugly. I sat her down in my living room and laid out the evidence. I showed her the spreadsheet, the bank statements, the texts. She listened silently, her expression shifting from shock to anger on my behalf. "Gloria," she said, her voice low and firm. "He has no idea, does he? He thinks his salary paid for all this." I nodded, a cold sense of calm settling over me. "He thinks my inheritance was just some rainy day fund. He has no concept of what things cost or where the money came from. He just saw the lifestyle and assumed it was his." Sarah looked around the beautifully decorated room. "So, what's the plan?" she asked. I pulled up a new tab on my laptop. It was a list of the top-rated moving and storage companies in our area. "My job is to preserve and organize records," I said, a faint, bitter smile on my lips. "Now, I'm just deaccessioning a collection. I'm taking inventory before I remove the assets from the archive." The plan took 2 weeks to execute. 2 weeks where I lived with my cheating husband, feigning normalcy. It was the hardest performance of my life. I made him dinner, asked about his day, and listened to his fabricated stories about stress at work. Every smile I gave him felt like a betrayal to myself, but it was necessary. I needed him to remain comfortable and completely oblivious. While he slept, I planned. I hired a moving company for a specific date, the Friday of a long weekend, a day I knew Mark would be out of the house for a team-building golf trip with his colleagues. I had seen the booking on his calendar, a golf trip with an overnight stay. How convenient it was with Jessica. Of course, I knew because I saw the hotel confirmation in his email trash folder. The day before the move, I met with a lawyer. I didn't want a messy divorce battle. I wanted a surgical extraction. I presented her with Project Uncoupling. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s. She looked through my files, her eyebrows raising higher with each document. She examined the spreadsheet, the scanned receipts, the premarital agreement we had signed stating that any assets owned prior to the marriage or purchased with inherited funds would remain separate property. She looked at me over the top of her glasses. "M.S. Miller," she said, using my maiden name, which I had kept professionally. "This is the most thorough and well-documented case I have ever seen. You've done all the work. What is it exactly you want from me? I want to ensure that when I leave..." I replied, "I can take my property with me without any legal repercussions, and I want to file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, for which I have proof." She smiled. Consider it done. As for your property, legally, anything you can prove you purchased with your separate funds is yours to take, and you, my dear, have the receipts for everything. On the morning of the move, I woke up feeling a strange sense of calm. Mark was already up, packing his golf bag, radiating excitement. He gave me a hurried kiss goodbye. "Don't wait up tonight," he said cheerfully. "We'll be celebrating a big win." "Oh, I'm sure you will," I replied, my voice even. "You have a great time." The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, my operation began. At exactly 9 a.m., a large moving truck pulled up to the curb. A team of 4 efficient, professional movers came to the door, clipboard in hand. I had already packed my personal items, my clothes, my books, my files. The movers were for everything else. I walked them through the house, room by room, with my spreadsheet on a tablet. "This sofa," I said, pointing. "This coffee table, this rug, the television and the media console, all the lamps. In the dining room, the table, all 8 chairs, the sideboard, and the chandelier. In the kitchen, the espresso machine, the microwave, the stand mixer, all the pots and pans, the silverware, the plates." We went from room to room. The movers were unfazed, simply marking items on their list and beginning their work with practiced efficiency. They wrapped the furniture in blankets, boxed up the contents of the kitchen, and carefully took the art off the walls. The house grew progressively emptier, the sounds of our life replaced by the echo of footsteps on bare floors. By 3 p.m., they were done. The house was a hollow shell. The only things left were Mark's clothes in the closet, his toiletries in the empty master bathroom, and the bed in the guest room, which had been a gift from his parents. I had left him that out of a final, fleeting sense of pity. I paid the movers, who loaded the last box and drove away, taking my meticulously curated life to a secure storage unit I had rented. I took one last walk through the vacant rooms, the afternoon sun streaming through the curtain. Less windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the empty space. It didn't feel sad, it felt clean. I took my suitcase, my laptop bag, and walked out the front door, locking it behind me for the last time. The great unpacking of my life was complete. Now, all that was left was for Mark to come home to the Echo. I spent that night at Sarah's apartment. We ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I turned my phone off, unwilling to let any communication from Mark disrupt my first night of freedom. The next morning, I turned it back on. There was a flood of notifications, 37 missed calls, over 50 text messages. They started around 11 p.m. the previous night and grew increasingly frantic. The first text read, "Hey, where are you? House is dark." A few minutes later, "Gloria, did you go out?" Then the confusion began. What the hell? Where is all our stuff? Did we get robbed? The panic escalated quickly. "Call me right now. The whole house is empty. The TV is gone. The sofa. What is going on?" The accusations followed. "Is this some kind of sick joke, Gloria? What did you do?" The final messages, sent in the early hours of the morning, were a mix of rage and desperation. "You can't just take everything. That's our stuff. You have lost your mind. I'm calling the police." I read them all with a detached sense of calm, like an archivist reading a frantic letter from a long, dead historical figure. Around noon, a call came through. It was him. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a message appeared. It was a single, curt sentence. "I'm at my parents'. I'm coming to get my things tomorrow. We are done. Get your stuff out of my house." I almost laughed. My stuff. What did he think was left? I replied with my first and only text to him. "I already have my things. The house is all yours, Mark." The confrontation he was expecting never happened. Instead, he got something far worse, silence. My lawyer had already filed the divorce papers that morning, citing infidelity. An email had been sent to his personal account containing the petition, along with a link to a secure online folder. Folder contained Project Uncoupling, every receipt, every photo, every bank statement, and copies of the text messages between him and Jessica. There was no room for argument. It was a meticulously documented case file of his betrayal and my ownership of our life. The next day, Sarah drove me to the house. We parked down the street waiting. Right on time, Mark's car pulled up, followed by a pickup truck driven by his father. Mark stormed up to the front door, unlocked it, and marched inside, his father trailing behind him. We couldn't see inside, but we could imagine the scene. Him striding into the empty living room, ready for a fight, only to be met with the booming echo of his own footsteps. Him expecting to see boxes with my clothes, instead finding bare walls and dust bunnies. We waited. About 15 minutes later, he came back out, his face pale and slack with disbelief. He wasn't angry anymore. He just looked broken. He said something to his father, who just shook his head and patted him on the shoulder. They didn't go back inside. There was nothing for them to take. Mark got in his car and drove away. He didn't come to get his things. He came to the stark, echoing realization that he had no things to get. All he had was the house, an empty shell that he couldn't afford on his own, and the consequences of his actions. I hadn't screamed or cried or thrown things. I had simply taken what was mine. I had deaccessioned him from my life, leaving him in an empty archive of his own making. The months that followed were an exercise in rebuilding. The divorce was swift and clean. Mark, faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, didn't fight it. His lawyer advised him to settle quickly. He had no claim to any of my assets, and he knew it. He was forced to sell the house to cover his legal fees and the cost of the mortgage he could no longer manage alone. The last I heard, he was renting a small apartment across town. His relationship with Jessica apparently didn't survive the sudden and drastic downgrade in his lifestyle. It turns out the view from a one-bedroom apartment isn't as romantic as the one from a beautifully furnished colonial house you don't have to pay for. For me, life began anew. I rented a bright, airy apartment in the city, closer to my work. I sold most of the furniture we had shared. It felt good to let it go, to replace the artifacts of a past life with new things that held no memories of him. I kept a few favorite pieces, a vintage armchair, a painting I loved, but the rest was liquidated. The money went into my investment account, another piece of my future secured. My work at the Historical Society became a source of comfort and purpose. I was good at my job. I found meaning in preserving stories, in bringing order to the chaos of the past. One day, my boss called me into her office and offered me a promotion to head archivist. I had been working towards it for years, and the achievement coming at that moment felt like a validation of my own strength and competence. Sarah remained my rock through it all. We established a weekly dinner tradition, a time for me to talk, or not talk, about whatever was on my mind. It was during one of those dinners that I realized I hadn't thought about Mark all day. The space he had occupied in my mind for so long was finally empty, and new thoughts and plans were beginning to fill it. I started my own consulting business on the side, helping private collectors and small museums organize their archives. My reputation for being meticulous and thorough preceded me, and the business grew faster than I ever expected. I was building something that was entirely mine from the ground up. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old photographs for a client, I came across a picture of a young woman from the 1920s. She was looking at the camera with a confident, knowing smile, her eyes full of determination. She looked like a woman who knew her own worth. I thought of my grandmother and the advice she had given me all those years ago. I had honored her legacy. I had kept my records. I had preserved my own history, and in doing so, I had secured my future. My life was no longer a shared collection. It was my own personal archive. And as I sat there, surrounded by the quiet, orderly remnants of the past, I began to catalog my new life, one happy, independent, and meticulously documented day at a time.